Bienvenidas, bienvenidos. Let's talk about a definitive figure of our lifetime, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., probably the embodiment of a peaceful path towards equality. Let's talk about him, his namesake, a little bit about the history. But first, this is Latina Literati. Dr. King was named for Martin Luther, the German Augustinian friar who was a professor, he was a composer, he was a theologian, and he took his vows in the Augustinian order in about 1507. So Martin Luther so loved the church that he dedicated his life to it, taking vows of poverty and obedience. And he was fed up with the excesses of the church and its proposal for payoffs or indulgences to get people out of purgatory. So he so loved the church, then he was fed up with the excesses. He said, that's it. I'm going to write a 95 thesis about all the things that are wrong with this position of the church. And you'll remember that Germany is the center of printing at that point in time. In the 1500s in Europe, vast majority of people cannot read. But those who can read get their hands on this 95 thesis. And so it is the hot off the press thing to be reading and discussing. And of course, it eventually gets to Rome. By 1517, Martin Luther is a household name. He's a rock star in terms of the intelligentsia, in terms of those people that are debating different aspects of policy and aspects of theological positions. Eventually, there's a debate against the Dominican who is promoting the sale of these letters of indulgence, which are basically you pay for the letter of indulgence and your sins are forgiven. And you can also pay for people who are in purgatory to get out of purgatory. So it's a pay-as-you-go system, not what Martin Luther thought the church should be involved in. Quite interesting because the 95 thesis of those 95 themes, all of them have been addressed. So maybe all he had to do was wait, 500 years. But in any case, Martin Luther, of course, establishes the reasons why there's a schism in the church and why there are Catholics and Protestants in the world today. So why did I kind of lead in with this? Because I think there's some real parallels here. Dr. King is named after Martin Luther, a man who wants to correct the abuses that he sees in the society in which he lives. And I think Dr. Martin Luther King, the son of a Baptist minister, he himself would be a minister his whole life, ministering to community. And so I really feel like he identified with his namesake and understood that we are here to make this world a better place. For the little bit of time that we're here, we need to work together to come together to make it a better place. Dr. King, like his namesake, would be a scholar. He received his doctorate in theology from Boston College and would go on to spend his life writing as well as speaking throughout the country to try and bring awareness and also movement towards social justice in the United States. Dr. King was born in Atlanta, Georgia. He is the son, or was the son, of a Baptist minister. So the concept that we are all God's children, that we all have a right to dignity in our lives, is something that he was raised in. He was raised in the tradition of the Southern churches, where there's a lot of community and there is a feeling that together change can come about. There's a hopefulness in the churches. And so he is raised in that and takes that torch and then walks with it, bringing about the change that he feels needs to be made. of course, segregation, the brutality, and so many other things that we'll touch on today. So in 1955, he graduates with his doctorate in theology. He is married, has children, and serves as a Baptist minister to various churches throughout the South. So Dr. King helps, along with others, set up the Southern Christian Leadership Conference to pull together, to unify the moral authority and the power and the numbers of the Black churches in the South to work towards nonviolent protests and change in the service of civil rights. And so this is really pivotal in terms of the amount, the ability of thousands of people to come together and protest and nonviolently ask for justice. This is a huge, huge movement, and he's at the forefront of it. There are many inspirational quotes that Dr. King wrote in his lifetime and shared with those around him. But the first quote I'll share with you is, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." So think about that. Let's think about the places where we know that there is injustice occurring right now, whether it's on the southern border, whether it's in other countries. And we understand that if we cannot bring about justice, we are all under threat. We must all work towards justice so that we can rid ourselves of injustice and assure peace, because we cannot be at peace if we don't work towards justice. Dr. King is awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964, and in his acceptance speech, he says that nonviolence is a powerful tool for social transformation. And so that's really where he wanted the focus of the protests to be. Nonviolence, but importantly, also ensuring that there were results. And so not only is he involved in organizing protests throughout the South, but he's also negotiating with the leaders, the different leadership in Washington as well. So he's doing both. Dr. King's commitment to nonviolence meant that he was threatened, he was beaten, he was imprisoned, and there were people around him also being murdered. So he understood the threat to himself, to his family, and to those around him. In fact, he's famous for a quote from his letters from the Birmingham jail, where he writes, "If physical death is the price that some must pay to free their children and to free the white man of psychological death, then nothing can be more redemptive." These are really powerful words, powerful statements. You're really talking about a man who spent a lot of time thinking about the words that he used in these speeches to inspire others and to try and move the moral compass towards what it needed to be. Dr. King faced many threats to himself and to his family and to his co-workers. And so he understood that there was a real possibility he would be murdered, as he was. It was only after he came out against the Vietnam War that he really understood that he was in real jeopardy. And as he himself said, that he might not reach the mountaintop, he might not see the society that he wanted to build, but he was willing to do whatever was needed to try and get us there. Dr. King understood the very real connection between racism, militarism, and materialism. And so he understood that sending our Black and brown youth overseas to kill people who look like them was simply unjust. Not having educational opportunities so that you only could go to school if you first put your body on the line for oil or for corporate interests around the world, that simply was just not right. These are lessons that our leaders today continue to need to be reminded about. We have some really good leaders, some really dedicated leaders, and then there are others who are just on the payroll of corporate interests. Let's be real. And so that's why it's so important that we continue to push. Of course, now we have the tools of social media. We have the ability to come together on virtual platforms to ensure that we continue to work towards social justice. And what does social justice look like? Well, the voting rights protections, the Voting Rights Act protections that Dr. King fought so hard for that were eventually passed have been gutted by the Supreme Court, and the bill that would replace them or put them back in place has been stalled in the Senate. So that's really important, because if you can't vote, you can't oust or change the leadership if you're not being allowed to vote, if there's voter suppression. So we really need to push our senators to get that passed. That's really, really important, because that's how you make peaceful change. We must find new ways of trying to keep our communities safe. We must use our resources to ensure that the causes of crime are addressed, not just the brutality towards the poor, not just incarceration of our Black and brown communities. This is not having the greatest gulag on earth doesn't make you safer, obviously, and we know that because we have one of the highest murder rates as well. We need to also look at, and this is something that is talked about almost daily because there are horrendous shootings daily. We need common sense gun control. No hunter, no one needs a semi-automatic weapon for anything other than to kill other people. And so those should absolutely be banned. There's no reason for them, and we need to push our leaders to make our community safer. Imagine a government that, instead of sending bombs around the world to kill people, would spend the military budget, even 1%, 10% would do it, would pay for universal health care, would pay for universal education opportunities. So you could go to college, as many countries do, ensure that your education is quality and also not costly. In other words, you can go to college and not have to go into debt. Imagine that. Imagine having a universal basic income, which means that people would not have to work 2, 3, 4 jobs and still not be able to make ends meet. We have to work towards a society where there's economic justice, not just racial justice and not just social justice. There must be economic justice. And universal basic income has worked. It's been tried in several small pilot projects. And even giving unhoused people, there are 500,000 unhoused people in our country and 2 million empty homes owned by speculators. What do you think? I think the solution is right in front of us. If there are 2 million empty homes in this country and 500,000 unhoused neighbors, then what do you think we need to do? I think we need to demand that housing be made available to those who may not be able to acquire their own housing. And so things like just giving the unhoused some basic funds, like $1,000 a month, which is in terms of what is spent in the military, that is nothing, a drop in the bucket, truly allows people to lift themselves out of poverty. And so this notion that we shouldn't help others has nothing to do with the moral compass of Dr. Martin Luther King. We are here to help others and to ensure that our neighbors are lifted up and have a basic life of dignity. We honor Dr. King, his legacy, his work, by continuing in that same vein, on that same road, on the path he himself took. And we hope that all of us can make a contribution, however small, to ensure that our society, our community, our neighbors are safer and better off with every passing year. And so now on to my favorite part of the video, the book recommendations. And so I'm going to recommend 3 books, all of them having to do with Dr. King. The first, really interesting, is a book that came out just this past year, 2023, and it has the benefit of the files, the unsealed files of the FBI. So A Life, the life of Dr. King, is worth reading just because you get a kind of behind the scenes look at how the government was part of what led to the brutality and the death of such a great man. I always like to include the spouse. So Coretta Scott King wrote a book, and I think it's important to get her perspective on her life with Dr. King as well. And then the third book is also about Dr. King, and I hope that you will enjoy them. And again, remember, check your local library. I'm sure that some of these are there. Check your local booksellers. We love our libraries. We love to support our local booksellers. And as always, thank you so much for joining us on this joint journey. We would love you to subscribe to Latina Literati and let us know what you're reading. Let us know what you think about Dr. Martin Luther King and the work that he dedicated his life to. And as always, con mucho cariño, mucho amor, muchas gracias.